I love a good story. That's why we do this program called The Big Impact. And a few weeks ago, I had the privilege of meeting our featured guest today. We were together at a golf event, of all things, that was to raise funds for the Michigan Heroes Museum. And that's where I came in contact with Greg Johnson, a young man from Cairo, Michigan. And for those of you listening around the country who don't know where Cairo is, that's okay. It's not a huge town, which makes the story all the more compelling. As we now go to Houston, where Greg Johnson joins us here on The Big Impact, because the journey for a young man from Cairo to being on the Endeavour space mission is a pretty powerful one. Greg, how are you?
How are you doing, Bill? I'm doing great here in Houston. It's a beautiful day. I understand it's beautiful across Michigan as well. Looking forward to this weekend.
Well, we have so much ground to cover because you have such a story to tell. You probably don't think of it in those terms because, well, it's you live it, and it's just the path that life took you on. But I think people would be fascinated to learn how the young man from Cairo, Michigan, ended up on the Endeavour. So get us started. What did young Greg see in space-related conversations, or maybe something you saw on television, or maybe somebody you met? What inspired you to pursue the path you pursued?
Well, okay. And so Cairo, Michigan was my dad's permanent home of record. He was a military officer. He traveled all over the world. I was actually born in the UK, exposed to the military lifestyle from a young age. We lived in Europe, then we came back to the States. My paternal grandparents lived in Cairo, Michigan, Cummings Memorials, that right there on State Street. And so that was one of the grandparents' houses. And so, full disclosure, I didn't go to Cairo High School and I didn't grow up in Cairo, but that was my dad's home of record my entire childhood and continued on until he retired in Michigan some number of decades later.
Well, we're going to claim you either way, just so you know.
Well, it's all good. I went to high school in Ohio, so I have a real problem when, the Ohio-Michigan game happens and I have to claim loyalties. I currently live in Texas, so that's when I claim that, I'm a UT fan or something. But
had I known that you had Buckeye blood coursing through your veins, we may never have connected on this conversation.
There is no Buckeye blood. Proximity. My brother still lives in my dad's old house at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
So you have this eclectic background where you've been a little bit of everywhere, it sounds like.
That's true. And it's been an exciting go of it. And so as a kid, I was raised on headquarters military bases where the bands are. And so I saw airplanes from a very young age. And of course, when I was a kid, I'm in my 50s now. So I was a kid when we were doing the Apollo program. In fact, I was at my grandparents' house on July 20th, 1969 in Cairo. And my mom and dad woke up me and my brother and sister a little bit past our bedtime. And we watched Neil Armstrong step foot on the surface of the moon. I was 7 years old. And I was truly inspired at that moment. I never really thought I'd be able to become an astronaut, but that became the dream and it was cemented in. And so as a kid, I loved airplanes. I loved spaceships. I followed the space program as well as aviation and ended up going into the Air Force to fly airplanes. Again, not thinking that it would lead to the astronaut opportunity, but knowing that that was the stuff that really got me charged up. So I worked hard in school, started flying airplanes for the Air Force. And one day I ran into a gentleman named Charlie Bolden. He was an astronaut. He had just come back from the Hubble Space Telescope as a pilot on the Space Shuttle. And this was just after Desert Storm. I was a young fighter pilot, and he said, "Hey, you could become an astronaut if you have an engineering degree and you flew airplanes in combat, and you actually have a shot at it. You just need to go to test pilot school," is what the gentleman said. Now, fast forward 2 decades, he has been the NASA administrator under President Obama, and now he's retired. But that gentleman probably was the singular most influential one in me going from the dream to, hey, it's a possibility. I didn't think it was a probability, but I threw my name in the hat. And so So that's really how I got there, from the childhood dream that, again, influences by parents and teachers, of course, and then this one interaction with Charlie Bolden at the right time in the right place, and he said, "Just do it." And then so 1998, they got the two Greg Johnsons confused, and we both got picked. There's another Greg Johnson, by the way.
Uh, so as the little boy version, when you first verbalize that dream, it's possible somebody could have come along and crushed it and said, what are you talking about? Just don't even get those thoughts out of your mind. Or they could have come along and said, that is so cool. We want you to pursue your dreams, and been very supportive of it. What was it like? Do you remember kind of
I say it
the
was both.
reinforcement?
Yeah, at the time, my older brother and sister, probably the former. "Hey, you got to be kidding me. There's no
Mm.
way you could do that, kid brother." And of course, parents are very supportive, and they say, "Oh, of course, little Gregory can have a shot at it." But nobody really believed it, neither did I. But that's the cool thing about the way, the journey that you go through life. We have, opportunities, as my dad used to say, just do your homework. So when the door of opportunity opens, you can step through and take charge. And that's how he raised us, to do our best, to dream a little, but also be grounded in reality. Not to do things just as square fillers, but actually things you really love. And for me, the path led to the astronaut corps.
Hmm. When I was 7, and somewhere in that span of time, I think I was going to be Batman. I was pretty sure I was inspired to be Batman. That didn't work out. I didn't really pursue it very much and got sidetracked by some other things, So there's one less crime fighter in the world than we possibly could have had back then. But for you, do you remember when you first actually began actively pursuing, with specificity in your mind, the path of at least maybe Air Force, if it wasn't necessarily NASA? When did you actually put feet to the idea that you'd had since you were a little boy?
Well, I loved math and engineering and science. And so probably early in high school, I decided that, man, I want to go be an engineer and build things and build aerospace vehicles.
Hmm.
And so my path then was, wow, well, I'd like to fly airplanes to be a better engineer. That's really what I was thinking. And so, well, where can you go pretty much fly airplanes if you're healthy, and also, go into the Air Force? The Air Force Academy seemed like the right choice. So I was, the three schools on the table were Michigan, MIT, and the Air Force Academy. And so, and that spring of that senior year, I just ended up going to the Air Force Academy, which was kind of interesting, instead of doing the ROTC thing, the ROTC thing. So I figured, well, I go to the Air Force Academy, maybe even get an advanced degree, and then fly airplanes and then design airplanes. The path changed a little bit over time. I started loving flying and didn't get back to engineering for a decade later at test pilot school. But that's kind of how it played out. An engineer, pilot to be a better engineer, then loved engineering, but fell in love with flying once I started flying in my early 20s.
I've only visited with some very amateur pilots who have their own little planes, but they describe the difference between what they thought it would be like to fly and what it's actually like to fly was hard to put into words for them. It sparked a very special something deep in their soul that made them both appreciate all of creation and the creator, along with the technology that allowed this to happen. Because for many of us mere civilians, none of it makes sense still. I'm not afraid to fly, but I still don't understand how it all works. How different was it for you when you first went up and you were in charge? You were you were in the cockpit versus what you thought it would be like, even with all the training?
It was magical. I remember my first solo flight. It actually was in a sailplane at the Air Force Academy, and it was serene and beautiful in the mountains near Tehachapi, California. And I just fell in love with it. And then I started flying powered airplanes. We had a Cessna 172 that they basically gave the Air Force Academy cadets initial training through solo as sort of a screening program to go to pilot training. And so I just loved that. I still remember flying up I-25 in colorful Colorado on my solo in the T41, and absolutely, yeah, Cessna 172 T41. I think I'm saying that right. It was 50 years ago.
There's a lot of listeners right now
yeah.
who are really listening closely to the model.
Well, if I got it wrong, it
You
was a
get a
few
letter.
decades ago.
Yeah.
But in any case, it was wonderful flying airplanes, and I knew that's what I wanted to go do, and so ended up going to grad school after the academy as planned, and then straight into pilot training. And so, and then they retained me as a pilot instructor in Lubbock, Texas, where I started my career as a pilot.
Hmm. It's a fascinating concept to go from ground to air, to do it in a sailplane, which I believe is the kind where they tow you up and then just kind of release the cable and you're in a glider essentially,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then to go through the evolution of it all as you've been describing. Uh, when did you first put your rear end in a fighter plane? Like big time, breaking the sound barrier kind of thing is a little bit different than gliding gently through the mountains of Colorado.
So 1989, and it was interesting because that was the year that I was married to a gal from Lubbock, Texas, who's in the other room right now with her sister, visiting from Lubbock. But so I got my fighter assignment the night before the wedding, and because I stayed as an instructor pilot for 3 years, a new version of the F-15 came out, brand new version, the F-15E. And so I got my first choice assignment because I didn't get it the 3 years prior when I was retained, with it. I was retained to be an instructor for 3 years instead of going off and flying fighters originally. And so the Strike Eagle just came out in 1989, and a brand new airplane. And of course, the Persian Gulf War kicked off in 1991. So I strapped on the F-15 for the first time in 1990, got my full training, and literally the first non-grade sheet ride was the flight over the Persian Gulf.
Wow.
Brand new fighter pilot at Desert Storm.
Okay, we got to talk more about that here in a moment. We'll take a quick break on The Big Impact and pick up where we left off with Greg Johnson here on The Big Impact. Our guest here on The Big Impact is Greg Johnson. He is telling us the story of what led him onto the Endeavor, onto a space mission. And when we last talked, Greg, you were just heading off for your first ever combat tour in Operation Desert Storm. We remember 1991. A lot of us very, very well, but to have the perspective on it that you did is really quite mind blowing. Here's a newlywed who is now in an active combat situation over. So take us through that experience. You finally get to fly the plane that you wanted to fly, but it's not just out for a casual loop around, Dakota.
Well, I remember it well. We actually deployed the day after Christmas in 1990. And as you said, I had just been married a little over a year, and we flew all the way to Saudi Arabia from Goldsboro, North Carolina. I had refueled 2,000 pounds in my training in the Strike Eagle, 1,000 in the day and 1,000 at night. By the time I got to the Persian Gulf, I probably got 100 times that much training. So a pure rookie. I was number 6 of a 6-ship on a tanker, and we flew across the ocean. It was, I believe, a 14-hour flight, certainly the longest flight in my logbook. And we landed, we flew through the night and into the next day. Built our tent city, and then within a few weeks, Desert Storm kicked off. It was a crazy experience, and in a way, it's sort of like my memories of my space flights, where it was completely something different from reality. And as I look back, it seems more like a movie, than a reality. But in any case, we had, it was a very well televised combat situation, and there were a lot of players in that short war. So again, we were we were just doing our jobs and ended up redeploying within 6 months back to the States.
Scared at all? Are you allowed to be scared?
It's funny. I didn't really. I saw they were putting live munitions on the jets around January 14th or so, and I didn't really think it was going to happen. I was saying, "Oh no, we're not. This isn't going to happen." That's actually what I told my wife the night before we were married. I said, yeah, I'm getting a fighter. We haven't had a war in 2 decades.
Yeah.
It's never going to happen."
What's the word? What could go wrong?
But as far as the flying, I mean, it was, our technology was so superior to the enemies that it wasn't. We were pretty confident. Also, you sort of have to be. And when people are shooting at you, it makes you understand that it's real, and you need to go execute your job. I think all of us were scared at one point or another. Probably for me, it was after my first combat mission, because I had been locked up by a surface-to-air missile, and I was number 4 of a 4-ship, and got kind of spit off by myself. It wasn't a night flight like most of the Strike Eagle flights. I actually was on a day patrol for the first 4 days. And so didn't expect to be doing my first missile evasion maneuver on my very first combat mission. So, but I learned a lot. Didn't hit the ground, didn't get hit by the SAM, and came back. So so after that mission, I had pizza pies for eyes for a few hours, but then I was fine.
When that lock on occurs, is there some sort of an alert that goes off for you, or somebody on the ground telling you? How do you even know you're in the crosshairs of the enemy?
So there are sensors that can tell you when weapons lock on you, but sometimes you have to pick it up visually. In this case, it was a sensor. So I had an indication of where to look, but and that's about as far as it can go.
Well, so you have that appreciation for the engineers, which is kind of what your
Yes.
original
Oh, yeah.
motivation was for all of this, which is kind of a cool way for it to come full circle. And I could talk to you for hours just about those missions, but I certainly want to lead us towards where we're ultimately headed, which is space. It's such a mind-blowing concept to realize. We watch video of launches, mostly payloads and things like that are going unmanned up, and it's kind of become routine / blasé. There are private entrepreneurs doing it, like Elon Musk and that kind of thing. But the awesomeness of a manned space shuttle leaving from Florida and going up for missions where people are outside of it and they're doing all sorts, it just still blows my mind. And I'm saddened to a degree that our culture, our country has kind of gotten so used to stuff that nothing's special anymore. I think it's absolutely fascinating. So can you walk us through the transition from fighter pilot to space?
Yeah, so I started that story earlier.
Yeah.
I had come back from the Persian Gulf War. It was it was actually just the next year. I met Charlie Bolden, a young astronaut pilot, and he was touring the country with then administrator Dan Golden, and they were selling the space program and doing these town hall meetings all over the country. And so I took the day off and went to Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, about an hour away from Seymour Johnson, where I was stationed, to listen with great interest about the space program. And that was the day I waited afterwards. I talked to Charlie Bolden. He said, go to test pilot school, which is something I sort of thought about, but he also said, you're up there in age, you got to get going. And so I was like in my late 20s. And so
like a professional athlete, you're almost done.
Yeah. So did the test pilot school thing, and I worked hard there. Stayed as a test pilot at Edwards for about 3.5 years. And then ended up getting into the astronaut corps in 1998. So it was about a 5-year trip from fighter pilot to being a test pilot and flying a bunch of different kind of things, including different versions of the F-15, and then into the astronaut corps.
Well, is there like a key set of criteria that allowed you to make that switch over to the astronaut corps? Was it something you had to to work through and earn your way in or study your way in? How did it happen? Why was it suddenly okay?
Well, in the day I was applying to the astronaut corps, there weren't as many people applying. There were pilots, and there were the mission specialists who came from basically all different walks of life. And so I was competing with the pilots from the different services, and they picked 8 pilots that year in my class of 1998, which interestingly enough, the other Greg Johnson was also one of the pilots.
Wow.
So yeah, so as pilots, they had, for the space shuttle, the pilot was a very specific position in the on the crew, and so the pilots had very similar resumes. We generally were test pilots in one of the services. If we had seen combat, it was helpful because your first shuttle flight is a little bit like your first combat mission. You're trained, you're confident, but you really don't know what's on the other side.
All of the simulation in the world, I can't imagine, could actually simulate the power of that beast.
Uh, Indeed. And I trained for a long time. You may recall we lost a shuttle in the early 2000s. And so we turned off the shuttle. We continued training, but we turned off flying shuttles for a couple years. And so the folks in my class, we didn't fly until the 8, 9, 10 year point.
Wow.
So we got a lot of training, but still that very first launch was amazing. It was just an amazing demonstration of power, energy, vibration, light, sound, acceleration, just incredible.
You deal with all of these things very rationally as you explain them to us. But I have to think that when you hear, hey guys, there's going to be about a 2-year delay, that's a long time. That's a long time to have to kind of reset your rhythms and know that it's going to be another 24-ish months until you go up, because now we got politicians involved. We've got some safety issues we're trying to figure out. And will the program ever happen again? Did you ever find yourself discouraged when you're just stuck in the repetition of training over and over and over and over and over again?
That's very insightful, Bill. And that was one of the challenges for us. We were not certain that we were going to get to fly in space. So that was one. Um, Two is I always wanted to have a backup plan. So I actually started studying for my MBA during that period of time, as well as helping with the accident investigation so that I could, because I wasn't 100% sure that I was going to get to fly. When we lined up the absolute mandatory shuttle flights remaining in the assembly of the space station, some of us in our class could fall short. And so we just didn't know. I didn't know that I was going to get one flight. And as you know, I actually slid in and got a second one at the very end,
Hmm.
but I didn't have any expectation of even having one. So we did have motivation challenges. We tried to keep a positive attitude and get through it. We tried to learn as much as we could during the return to flight period. And I think the shuttle was so much safer ironically, as a result of that 2.5-year exercise of going through every single subsystem and system of the space shuttle and all of its parts, all of its systems, and making sure that it was safe as it could be.
Our guest here on the Big Impact is Greg Johnson, and he's done something that very few people in the history of mankind have done, and he has piloted a space shuttle mission, a couple of them. And Greg, when you and I met, I mentioned at the beginning of the program that it was at a golf tournament. I think you or somebody else said to me, "Yeah, 10 years ago today, he was in outer space," and I'm like, "Wait, what?" It's because the juxtaposition of where you would have been looking down from I don't know how many miles away to us standing in the parking lot of the Timbers Golf Club in Tuscola, Michigan. To me, those contrasting moments are pretty mind blowing. So take us to launch pad, strapped in, on your back. You hear the countdown from mission control. You may have heard some holds up until then. I don't know how smoothly it all went that first time. But as it started getting into that, T minus 30 and 20 and 10, can you take us through the emotions of that day for your first launch?
Well, T minus 31 seconds was when I could feel my heart really starting to pound. And, as I said before, we were confident, we were well trained, but we were very respectful of what was about to happen. Uh, my first launch was at night, and when the main engines lit, the vehicle started vibrating, very much different than the sim. So this, and then 6 seconds later, we leaped off the ground like a wild animal. The light illuminated the Florida coast. We had an overcast deck at about 5,000 feet. And so the dead of night turned to day. And as we're accelerating toward that 5,000-foot cloud deck, it was like flying through a wall of fire. And literally, we went through that really thin cloud deck, boom, then it was just completely dark and serene, excepting that we were still vibrating and accelerating for the first couple minutes while those solid rocket boosters were putting out about 7 million pounds of thrust. When they fell away, everybody kind of has a sigh of relief because, we lost one shuttle in the early phase of the launch trajectory. Challenger. And so, but once the solids fell away, it still was a pretty interesting, accelerating, vibrating kind of ride as we, for the next 6.5 minutes, accelerated to 17,500 miles an hour. And then boom, the engines went out, and then there we were in space, floating in space.
And it becomes smoother at that point?
Oh, it was complete. It was smoother after we got off the solids, but it was still, we're rocking around and accelerating and vibrating quite a bit, more than I expected, I think, but much less than during the first 2 minutes and 10 seconds.
Yeah.
But then after main engine cutoff, it was completely serene. Oh, with one exception. When we came off the external tank, we had a minor malfunction with some of our jets, reaction control system jets on the way up. And so we had an asymmetric number of jets firing as we came off the external tank. And it was just like boom, 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 like cannons firing away from us, little balls of fire going away from us as we separated from our tank that was holding the fuel for the main engines. After that, then it was completely serene, and we were all laughing. It was just crazy, from wild ride to completely silent, zero gravity solitude.
Was that first flight for you also the first flight for everybody on your crew? Were you all in it together as rookies?
There were 4 rookies. We had 3 veterans. So at that time, prior to that, they weren't putting that many rookies on flights. But toward the end of the shuttle program, they realized, hey, we need to fly some of these rookies so that we'll have, a pipeline of experienced astronauts when we transition to the next thing. So yeah, we had 4 rookies on that flight. I'm saying bye to my sister-in-law.
Well, we none of us hearing your side of all of this can even come close to relating. We see TV commercials where it says, "Oh, the new Ford Mustang goes from 0 to 60 in 3.5." You're like, you must be laughing about the ground speed comparisons, because as you're getting up to 17,000 miles per hour, the power behind that defies description. I can't fathom what that would feel like to not have. I'm guessing you're pinned back to your seat for a while and you're not able to move a muscle.
Well, the acceleration increases as we get lighter. So it steadily increases and is limited at 3 Gs, which is not that much through the seat of the pants in a fighter, but the RG was directly through our hearts on our backs. So it was a sort of acceleration that you're not accustomed to. Just like driving a really fast car, accelerating, like a Monte Carlo or something when we were in the 70s, and just flooring it. The only difference is in a Monte Carlo, when you I don't know if buried it was our terminology. We got the speedometer up above 100, admittedly. You'd stop accelerating at some point. You'd be as fast as the car will go.
Yeah.
And this just kept on going for 8.5 minutes. And so that's the analogy, is you have that sort of acceleration that people feel in pretty souped up cars, but it just keeps going and going and going. And now you're in the back, you're just getting pushed back. You're held at 3 Gs for the last few seconds of the trajectory, and then boom, main engine cut off.
Did Greg Johnson always have a love for speed from young age to now?
I really did. I love to go fast, and I hinted that I might have gone too fast in one of my dad's cars in early age. I've settled down now. I don't generally drive my BMW much over 100 anymore.
Much over.
I'm just kidding. I do not. I am a law-abiding citizen.
I'm
Speed limit
picturing
plus
now.
9.
I'm picturing the energetic deputy who's pulling over the BMW, and as he comes up and Greg takes out license and registration, he just so happens to also have some sort of a card that says astronaut. And
Oh, that's a no. You don't do that. You just you take your medicine, you pay your fine, and don't do it next time.
I still would have a very hard time not whipping out that card. I'm just telling you. So Greg, you're up on this first flight, and it has smoothed out to the point where you can take a breath again and look around and make sure that everything's still where it's supposed to be. But then at some point you get a view. I'm outside. I don't know how that view comes. I don't know where you're looking. I don't know how you see it. But do you remember when you first looked back down on the big blue marble and kind of soaked it all in?
You know, most astronauts will tell you it changes things instantly when we look back at our beautiful planet. And words don't do it justice. Photos and videos don't do it justice. But the beauty of the place that we all live on, and this global pandemic underscores the global connectivity that we have. And this is a special place. This is our spaceship, and we share it with all the crew members and passengers around the world. And we have to take care of our planet and take care of each other. And yeah, most astronauts have a very profound overview, emotional impact when we first look back at the planet, and we end up staring at the planet for hours during our off time.
Hmm.
With me, I was up there a little over a month, 32 days. And the second flight, we had the cupola. The first flight, the cupola was not installed on the space station. It's a big, beautiful bay window at the base of the space station. But the second flight, I spent hours and hours looking out the window. I was also a robotic arm operator, so I was doing my job as well as looking out the window. But I got a shot of Michigan just one day before we came back from Earth. Finally, clear blue skies over Traverse City, Michigan, right directly over Long Lake. So I saw the whole upper half of Long Lake. We ended up just about over Cairo, the pass passed over Lake Michigan, Traverse City, Cairo, and continued on. It was an amazing pass all the way across the ocean and to Madagascar. We had audio contact with the ground and taken photos on that pass. It was just a magnificent moment.
Man,
But that was toward the end of my second flight. But I kind of bookended the looking at the flight, the Earth for the first time, and that was one of my last admirations of the planet.
Oh man. I'm a man of faith who believes that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I don't think it all happened by accident. I don't know if there is almost a religious feel to what you experienced while you were up there. Did you feel tiny? Did you feel like an ant in all of this?
Well, you do. You actually really do, because you realize how, well, first of all, realize how fragile the Earth looks. The atmosphere is very thin.
Mm.
And to us, it seems like it goes way up in the sky. But from space, we're fragile and vulnerable. And then you also realize that this is just one tiny object in a solar system that's in a galaxy of galaxies. And so I would say spiritual is a word, because that's broader than religious. It's just recognizing, how profound our universe is and how tiny we are in comparison.
Yeah. Well, here we are in this day and age where it seems like all roads lead to narcissism in most of what we see and hear and we take in, and everything is about me, and how I feel and my truth and all these different things. And I just have to think that when you're in that position, as you've been describing, you all of a sudden you're like, you know what? It's really not all about me. This is so much more vast than most of us can conceive. It would be I think it would be an emotional injection that kind of metaphorically maybe brings you to your knees and just says, "Wow, um, I'm 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 not everything that I thought I was." And I'm not saying that about you. I'm just saying in general, that's seems like what we would experience if we were to take in that perspective.
Yes, and I think Neil Armstrong was one of he first of all, he was my hero. He was my number one ever since I was 7. But he had a very strong sense of humility that I very much respect and try to emulate, because we are lucky that we got the opportunity to see the Earth from that perspective, and it is not about us. And so as we address all the problems of the world, I'm the eternal optimist. I think that we're going to come out of this pandemic stronger. I mean, here we are doing a talk show interview
Yeah,
on Zoom, and it's almost like we're in the same room together.
right.
It wouldn't have been that way, at least with me, 2 years ago. I just wasn't that proficient at this stuff.
Mhm.
And so I think we're all better as a result of that. I think we'll be healthier. But these challenges do underscore that we're really, we affect each other here
Yeah.
on our spaceship Earth, our ecosystem.
My last question for you: if the boss called, whoever the boss is, I really don't know who that is, and said, "Hey, Greg, we got a little special mission. We'd like to have kind of an alumni flight, and we'd like to have you go back up again." How long would it take Greg Johnson to say yes or no?
About 2 seconds. Yes.
You're in.
We had a reunion call, Zoom call, just a couple nights ago. It was the 10th anniversary of our landing for STS-134. And Senator Mark Kelly, he was the commander, and he has a busy schedule in Washington, but he was there with his wife, Gabby. All 6 crew members were all there with our spouses. We got a cool photo, but we commiserated about who's going to get to go to space again. And I think maybe 1 or 2 of the 6 of us will get to go to space again. And I don't think I'm going to be one of them, but I'll raise my hand if I get the chance.
How's that decided? Can we write a letter? Can we,
It's a
can we send
magic
a
eight
tweet?
ball. It's a magic 8 ball in the astronaut
Shake it
office.
up.
Yeah, shake it up. And if Johnson pops up, no. Two of our crew from the 134 are still active astronauts. And those are the probables for having another space flight. The other 4 of us, we do it, but it's not very likely.
Well, we've been talking for about 40 minutes or so, and I can tell when you entertain the idea of going back up that a special smile comes to your face because it's still in your blood, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and I've just transitioned to a flying job now. I've been an engineer for the last couple of years, but now I'm going to go fly again because I that's that's in my spirit, that's in my heart, and I'm excited to go fly. So
Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing the journey with us, and thanks for your service. By the way, I don't want to overlook that. This is an important part of our nation's security and our defense and exploration. And I hope that young minds are still challenged by this. I hope that there's still an aspiration to do things that are big, that seem impossible. I hope we still have that. We don't hear a lot about it, but I hope it's still out there. I hope that when Greg Johnson is traveling to schools and telling his story, I really hope that there is a young version of Greg Johnson who's age 7 or 8 who goes, That's what I want to do. Because we need more explorers and adventurers like you.
I hope for that as well, Bill. It's been a pleasure meeting you, golfing in Frankenmuth with you a couple weeks ago, and that's why I said yes, because this is my mission here. Sunset mission is to try to keep the movement going.